of today's influences and the incredible power it wields.
When you sit down bleary-eyed with a box of cereal, you may think that you're just grabbing a quick, nutritious breakfast. But you're also contributing to the biggest success story of the modern food industry. Inside the cereal box is one of the most sophisticated confections of invention, processing, and advertising that modern business has ever seen.
Until the breakfast cereals arrived, there was no such thing as convenience foods.
They've transformed what we eat and the way we live.
Breakfast cereals have contributed to changing the entire pattern of the meal structure in Britain.
And if you understand breakfast cereals, you'll understand the modern food business.
Breakfast cereals in many ways are the archetypal processed food, product of modern capitalist food economics.
They're great!
With exclusive access to the world's largest food companies, this series tells the inside story of how big business feeds us.
Over the last 50, 60 years, there's been a radical change from a time of very little availability to a time of plenty.
Told through three products that business has transformed from novelty into necessity: cereals, bottled water, and yogurt. This is the story of how giant food companies transform cheap commodities into hugely profitable brands.
It's just like a blank canvas for an artist to create products using very cheap materials to create enormously lucrative products.
And how they persuade us to fork out billions by selling us dreams.
Advertising is one of the foundations of the modern food industry, there's no question about it.
It's also the story of an industry that exploits our health fears and courts controversy.
It's a trick that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Say it's going to prevent cancer. You can take that ingredient that costs a few cents and then sell it for multiples.
This is the story of the foods that make billions. July 2010. And behind the imposing walls of Kellogg's Manchester HQ...
Morning, everyone. Do you want to move a little bit closer, please?
Some of the finest minds in the cereal world have gathered to hear about the future shape of breakfast.
Yeah, if you squeeze up a little bit more, and then we'll make a start.
Careers, reputations, and the future of Coco the monkey himself hang in the balance.
We've got the biggest ever launch program for a Coco Pop cereal.
In 6 weeks, Kellogg's is launching Chock and Roll, its new wheel-shaped cereal. The prize? A slice of the money-spinning UK children's breakfast market, worth over £500 million annually.
This new formula for Chock and Roll, we've been working on this for 2 years. Sometimes you don't get it right the first time, and you learn from your mistake and you come back and try again.
It's taken a lot of legwork to get this far.
We tested a whole range of different shapes. We tested links and chains and squares and triangles. You name it, we tested it. And what we actually found was that this wheel really, really captured kids' imaginations.
We're going to be advertising to Mum, both in TV and in press. And we're going to be spending roughly £3 million to do this. And that's a lot of money.
What we're working towards is the 16th of August. This is a critical date for Kellogg's and Chock and Roll. And what we need to ensure is that we've got it in full distribution to maximise the TV that goes live that week.
The supermarkets are primed and ready. Nothing has been left to chance.
Oh, I'm sorry, darling.
Even the exact shelf space has been reserved.
It's going to be next to Coco Pops Original.
Lovely.
On the middle shelf, on a minimum of 2 facings. So it gives us maximum opportunity to get in front of Mum.
It is one of 100 new cereals that will be launched this year.
Mommy! Is that what you want? Yeah.
Space is always at a premium, and people have to justify new lines, so it's always a constant battle to get that little bit of room.
They're doing you a favour, they're giving you space, and you've got to promote hard and advertise and get people in there to pick the stuff off the shelves.
But if brands don't deliver at the checkout, then the end is swift and brutal.
Once you get on the shelf, if the product doesn't sell, well, it's going to come off the shelf.
You see more new products launched in the UK than any other market in the world, and a higher proportion of them fail. So it's a high-stakes game.
"700 products compete for our attention in a saturated sector. But what all cereals have in common is that they started as grain, a cheap and characterless commodity. The grain is processed before advertising loads it with meaning. The result is sold for a big profit. Understand this process, and you understand the modern food business.
From the industry point of view, cereals are just wonderful because what they are is really, at heart, carbohydrates, pretty cheap to buy. It's just like a blank canvas for an artist to create products using very cheap materials to create enormously lucrative products.
94% of us have a box of cereal in our kitchen cupboards. But a century ago, nobody did. How did this emblematic industry colonize our kitchen cupboards so comprehensively? The answers lie in a sleepy American town, surrounded by a surplus of corn.
It was almost as far back that our sponsor, Kellogg's, set up shop in Battle Creek.
The extraordinary thing about breakfast cereal is how you can locate it to this one place, Battle Creek, Michigan.
Battle Creek actually changed the eating habits of the world.
It really goes back to these two extraordinary brothers, W.K. Kellogg and his older brother, John Harvey Kellogg.
J.H. Kellogg was a teetotal, vegetarian, Seventh-day Adventist.
John Harvey Kellogg was the doctor who had set up this sanatorium, which was doing all sorts of weird quack cures involving hydropathy and water and enemas, and he was obsessed with constipation and masturbation and vegetarian diets.
When not engaged in giving his patients pint after pint of yogurt and water enemas, he fed them on tasteless cooked flakes, the precursors of today's cereals.
And then you have his younger brother, 8 years younger, W.K. Kellogg, who had initially gone into the family business trying to sell brooms, and he was the entrepreneur.
William Keith Kellogg's masterstroke was to add sugar to his brother's plain flakes to make them taste better and easier to sell.
WK could see a profit if they could start selling this cornflake they invented. John Harvey called him in and said, "I understand you want to put sugar on one of our cereals." And WK said, "Yes, I do." And John Harvey said, "I will not allow it." And the two brothers split then. And in 1906, W.K. Kellogg started the Toasted Cornflake Company.
Right from the beginning with breakfast cereal, because of the relationship between these two brothers, there was a double thing going on, an obsession with health from John Harvey and a great desire to make money from WK. And what resulted was Kellogg's cornflakes, which sort of eventually became one of the most successful foods in the world.
Some say the decision to add sugar to grain was cereal's moment of original sin. It led to unimaginable profits, but also triggered a debate about food additives that still rages today. Back in Battle Creek, imitators saw there was big money to be made from cornflakes.
It was like a gold rush. At that time, you could buy a bushel of grain for 75 cents and make $12 worth of cereal from it.
I think in the year 1911, there was something like 108 different brands of cornflakes, all being produced in this one tiny corner of America.
What set Kellogg's apart was WK's visionary commitment to advertising. He gambled a third of his startup capital on one advertisement in the Ladies' Home Journal, one of the most widely read magazines of his day. This single act helped usher in the modern world of advertising that we all now inhabit.
W.K. Kellogg advertising was unbelievable. He put an ad. He asked the women of America, stop buying cornflakes because we can't keep up with the supply. But down at the bottom was a coupon where you could get a supply of corn. Well, reverse psychology, women went out and bought it.
From the very early days, the brands were built through advertising, building relationships with consumers, dramatizing the individual benefits of the individual brands. So absolutely critical to their success.
His punt paid off. Cornflakes were an instant hit. Sales leapt from 33 cases a day to nearly 3,000. Over the next decades, the firm advertised heavily in print and radio, building Kellogg's Cornflakes into a national brand. But the advent of television and the opportunities it presented supercharged its transformation into one of the first truly global food brands. Selling food would never be the same again.
Television killed radio just like that. Television became where people spent more of their leisure time than anywhere else. I mean, it was an irresistible force for any advertiser.
Better advertising is what the Leo Burnett Company is all about.
The man who taught Kellogg's and the rest of the food industry how to harness the power of this new medium was legendary ad man Leo Burnett.
Good morning, Tommy. Care for a bowl of Rice Krispies with us?
Oh, I just had some.
He was obviously really impressed with its power and with its ability to translate products directly to consumers.
But if it hadn't been for a chance encounter on a train, an historic partnership would never have been formed. It would alter food advertising history.
In 1949, Leo Burnett, who lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, was traveling to Chicago, as was Mr. Kellogg, on a train, and they met.
And they talked, and Leo never stopped selling advertising.
It was then that Mr. Kellogg gave Mr. Burnett the brief, and the first brief was really around cornflakes.
You work all day a better way with Kellogg's in the morning.
The advertising they produced, in many ways we'd look at it now and we'd find it quite quaint. But at the time, it was highly revolutionary, and what they did was they created characters.
I think Leo Burnett, the agency, had a talent for creating characters and sticking with them and exploiting them.
Yes, sir. Tony the Tiger from Kellogg's. I wouldn't miss my...
And that Tony the Tiger represented a way of thinking that we were good at. We were real good at. Imagery, yeah.
Here's the secret formula for the secret toasted-in frosting. If anybody tries...
He took a threatening beast and made him friendly. He moved him being a threat to a friend. You can't imagine him going great and biting you.
They're great!
Tony the Tiger was created back in the 50s and Coco the Monkey back in the 60s. But they're indelibly linked to the food. And consumers still love the food. And they love the characters that come on their cereal box with their food. And moms and dads have grown up with the characters, and they pass that love along to their kids. So it's kind of it's a virtuous circle.
Americans loved it. The emotional connection had been established. Previously characterless grain was now charged with meaning. Across the Atlantic in 1954, Britain finally abandoned food rationing. So when ITV launched a year later, it was the perfect opportunity for the Americans to swoop. First into bat was Tony the Tiger.
Back, folks. They're great!
You could actually buy the nation in one night. And that was remarkable. So you could launch a product on a Thursday. By Friday, by Saturday, people were in the shops buying it. I mean, phenomenal.
British companies like Weetabix, who had no experience of TV advertising, were trounced.
One of the problems was, of course, although TV advertising was really quite an invention at that point, it was also quite expensive. And everyone was used to using press and not used to using television at all. And Weetabix used press quite extensively.
I knew it. Come on, darling.
But by then, Kellogg's was outselling all its rivals put together. The competition had to spend heavily just to stay in the game.
A bowl of Kellogg's cornflakes.
The Weetabix goes in 2 by 2, hooray! Hooray! 2 for me and 2
In the late 60s, our advertising spend was probably about a quarter of the selling price of a case of Weetabix.
Remember what we say, you make it.
The route to success was clear. Heavy spending on advertising means powerful imagery, brand loyalty, and boxes flying off the shelf.
Okay.
It remains so today. More money is spent on advertising cereal than on any other food. Kellogg's spends more than all its UK rivals put together.
We spend about $1 billion globally, and the UK would be our second largest advertising market in the world. It's essential for the vitality and health of the category, because the category remains vital, healthy, relevant to the consumer. It's essential for the brands to differentiate themselves so that they're picking yours off the shelf versus another brand or even a lower price competitor.
By the 1960s, Britain was changing. It was a time of optimism, and the years of austerity and tradition were being cast off. The perfect environment for a food that sold itself as modern, aspirational, and now food for now people.
During the 60s and 70s, there was a kind of conflict between the traditional English breakfast, represented by bacon and eggs, and breakfast cereal.
Cereal's the template for elevating convenience as the be-all and end-all of what, what food is.
It wasn't enough to push a product on taste. They needed to project a lifestyle. Cereals declared war on the cooked breakfast.
I think the battle between the egg and the cereal is a battle between two ways of life. The egg stands for wholesome family and country life. The cereal stands for city life, employment, new ways of thinking, speed, modernity in general.
Fay Weldon was on the front line. She was an advertising copywriter. One of her clients was the Egg Marketing Board.
At the time, breakfast cereals were the enemy of the egg. So we were, in a way, at war.
1 out of the total of 12 thought.
I don't think we saw it so much as a threat. Breakfast cereals were something new. It was more convenient. It was easier to prepare.
They were trying to persuade everybody that all they needed was a light breakfast, while we were trying to persuade them that what they needed was a good breakfast, and a good breakfast meant eggs.
Fay and her team fought back with one of the most famous ad slogans of all time.
Go to work on an egg.
Despite spending almost £1 million a year and hiring household names, the egg struggled to be cool.
So, I shall just have to go to work on an egg, yes. Free spinning top. You get one inside every packet.
The next wave in the savvy American invasion would outflank the traditional British breakfast. The marketing gurus had gone beyond pushing such mundane considerations as taste and cost.
Submarine dead ahead. Stand by.
They unleashed their secret weapon, the free gift in every box.
And no ordinary sub either. It's a real working model of the world's first atomic power sub, which dives and surfaces in...
One I remember particularly, because I was still at school, were the toy submarines. I remember playing with those with my brother and see who could win in terms of going to the bottom and then getting to the top again.
the giveaways became ever more ambitious.
New Kellogg's Rice Krispies competition. 70 Burns electric guitars to be won, each worth 80 guineas.
From the end of the Second World War to 1970, UK cereal sales tripled.
The things that we put in the packs, the back panel promotions, was really all part of building a relationship, a more detailed relationship with the consumer.
That's the first prize in Kellogg's Woman Dream House competition.
Oh, shut up. Let me get on with breakfast.
The egg marketers cracked under cereal's pressure. Eventually, the Go to Work on an Egg campaign was dropped. American branded culture had changed our way of life.
In the 1950s, you have maybe 50% of people still eating a cooked breakfast of some form or other, even that if that's only a boiled egg. By the 1970s, that's gone down to about 20%.
So that was the end of that, and actually the end of my job, as I remember.
The food industry offered an alternative to cooking, because that's where the big profits lay. It had discovered that transforming cheap commodities like grain into premium products like breakfast cereals was the ultimate recipe for success.
We take the kernel, we take out the germ, because the germ contains the most oil, and that would go rancid in cornflakes if we didn't take it out. We also take off the skin, because that helps the flavors, the sugar, the salt, and the malt to penetrate. We then cook it, dry it down, roll it out, and then we toast the finished product.
Breakfast cereals are the archetypal processed food. You start with a whole grain, but then you process it, you strip it of anything that slows down eating. You add reinforcing substances. You add sugar to it. You add other stimuli to it. Right? You make it into a habit. You add the emotional gloss of advertising. You add toys to it. You make it part of the routine. You make it something that is socially acceptable.
A kilo of corn costs around 15 pence. On the high street, a kilo of Kellogg's cornflakes comes to £3, a 2,000% difference. This process of buying low and selling high is known in the business as adding value. It's what the modern food industry does.
The way you make money is to process food as much as possible, add value to it, add convenience, add packaging, add health claims, whatever you can do, complicate it essentially. And you get people to pay for other things besides the very cheap commodities at the bottom of the food chain.
In simple terms, if you're selling something with added value, it's something where you have turned the raw material into something that the consumer either couldn't or wouldn't do themselves, and they're therefore prepared to pay for it.
Breakfast cereals are at the heart of this equation. We pay more because we believe we don't have any time.
The kind of foods which have won out have been things like breakfast cereal, which require no cooking, no skills. You don't even need a kitchen, you just need a bowl, a spoon, a bit of milk, and the packet.
And what appeals to me is the fact that there's no messy washing up or cooking to do. Kellogg's can be served straight from the pack.
Breakfast was the first meal conquered by convenience foods. And at a time of day when speed is prized, the food business was pushing against an open door.
The whole cultural patterns changed with the rise of processed foods, and it's led by processed foods, but there is this, I mean, you can't pretend there's no demand. There are changes in family structures, in working lives that are very much they're interdependent. But what you see is a sort of breakdown in that whole cultural conditioning, the socialization that comes with people preparing food together, sitting down and eating together. I'm
On both sides of the Atlantic, the 60s was the golden age of food processing. The American dream began the moment you woke up. The cereal business had ballooned in value to almost $1 billion. The food industry seemed to offer convenience, choice, and plenty like never before.
Hunger
Then,
is hard to recognize
on May the 21st,
in America.
1968,
We know it in other
CBS
places,
broadcast a
like
game-changing
Asia and
documentary.
These children, all of them, are Americans, and all of them are hungry.
It would trigger a national debate
Hunger
about
is easy
nutrition,
to recognize,
which would in turn put cereal in the dock.
A quarter of San Antonio's Mexican Americans.
Watching the broadcast was future presidential candidate, Senator George McGovern.
The camera focused on this little guy, and they said, "What do you think when you come here every day and you watch the other children eat?"
Are you ashamed?
Are you ashamed?
Yeah, they hard.
Why are you ashamed?
Don't have one.
I said, "You know, it's not that little guy who should be ashamed. It's Senator George McGovern."
McGovern, a confidant of JFK, set up a Senate committee to investigate hunger in America and broader concerns about the American diet. One of the first people to testify before the committee was Robert Choate, a wealthy engineer and self-styled food campaigner.
What started out as issues about poverty and malnutrition quickly morphed, as he worked with Senator McGovern, into issues about the quality of food.
Our children are deliberately being sold the cereal sponsors' less nutritious products over television.
He focused on breakfast cereals primarily because he was disturbed about the manufacturers putting sugar coating. He thought that children were getting too much sugar in the diet. He felt it was a real threat to their nutritional health.
Cereals were the first big fight over these issues, and you had this period in the 70s where people looked a lot at sugar, and they looked a lot at marketing to kids and commercials for cereals on television.
Choate looked at 60 major cereals on the market in the US, and he ranked them in a scoring system out of 900, with 900 being nutritionally brilliant and 0 being completely worthless. And what he found was that out of those 60, 40 of them scored under 100, which effectively made them, as he put it, no better than drinking a shot of whiskey.
Each has a TV budget over $500,000 a year. None are in the top 9 nutritionally. All contain sugar.
Furthermore, nutrients and fiber are removed in the process of making some cereals.
Bob Choate coined the phrase empty calories, and that phrase caught on and is still very much referenced today. And typically it is a phrase that's used to denote foods that provide only calories with no nutrients. Unfortunately, the term was ascribed to cereal.
And this electrified America. It really took them by storm, because up to that point, so many people had thought cereals are really healthy, they're really good for you. And he's suddenly pointing out that actually in an experiment done on rats, they were better off eating the cereal box with some milk than they would have been eating the contents inside.
Mr. Choate, what are you trying to prove?
I wanted to show that here in this supremely profitable division of the food industry with sales of almost $1 billion a year, the ethics of the advertising department and television department has not kept up with the ethics of the food researchers who can turn out better food products.
If you go back to the 1970s and you look at what Robert Choate and Senator McGovern did, was they changed the way we began to look at food. It was the opening salvo in what would occupy a lot of attention over the next 4 or 5 decades.
Sugar and grain was a lucrative combination, and the cereal companies weren't about to abandon it.
Every time we conducted hearings that led us to recommend certain changes or regulations on the food industry, they opposed it. And I think without exception, that was true.
The contention was that some cereals only offered empty calories because of the way they were made.
A whole grain starts off typically with 20 to 26 nutrients, essential nutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential fats. Processing itself damages nutrients. They might be heat sensitive, like the B vitamins, or you might be breaking down the cereal so much that you start the process of the cell structures breaking down.
The big manufacturers did have a partial answer to these criticisms. For decades, they had been spraying vitamins back onto their cereals.
What the company does is to fortify the grain with a range of vitamins and minerals. These are over and above the levels that would be seen in the natural grain. And there is, I think, quite a lot of evidence that breakfast cereals in the UK do make a very significant contribution to the micronutrient intake of the population.
Ready-to-eat cereals do contain sugar as an ingredient, but it delivers so much more, and you cannot determine the nutritional merit of a food based on one ingredient. You have to look at it in totality. And so when you're looking at ready-to-eat cereal or sweetened cereal, they deliver many essential nutrients, vitamins and minerals.
With vitamins and iron, have you heard how good they are?
Very quickly, the cereal manufacturers realised that fortification, rather than being a kind of millstone around their neck, could become yet another marketing opportunity, and they could boast about how many of your daily vitamins you could get in the space of a day just from cereal.
Away from the debate in Washington, D.C., people were hungry for an alternative.
In the 1970s, there was a kind of backlash against cereals. You have all these kind of people rejecting the whole of the mainstream food culture. You have a sort of counterculture, you have a rise of vegetarianism, and you have a sort of rise of non-branded, non-packaged cereals, muesli sold through health food shops.
The younger generation sort of said, look, this modern foods, you know, it was the big companies producing stuff that they thought was not good. You know, conspiracy theory stuff. The big companies were, you know, producing fake food.
Two very different homegrown family firms were beginning to see the financial potential of this counterculture, and particularly the food that fed it. Weetabix, the leading British cereal manufacturer, and the Jordan brothers. A couple of miller's lads from Bedfordshire, Bill and David, had just returned home after backpacking around the west coast of America. Their company would go on to become a British cereal success story with a turnover of £85 million. But back in 1970, they found trouble at mill.
There'd been 400 mills in Bedfordshire, and it wasn't that encouraging to us to see that all but one of them had all wrapped up and gone home. So we had to find something for the family business to do.
The brothers had noticed the burgeoning health food movement in California, and in particular, a crunchy whole grain cereal known as granola.
Drop your shrink and stop your drinking, crunchy granola's neat.
Bill and I were lucky to actually see a little bit of what went on, and to recognise then that there was the opportunity of, you know, emulating, copying a few of the best ideas. And at the time, it seemed like, you know, an opportunity to do something a little bit different.
I'd been actually trained as a flour miller, so I kind of had an understanding about how you made whole grain products, and it was just interesting to see how creatively it was sort of made and sold in California. So I suppose we both turned up back here sort of thinking, you know, this really ought to happen.
They hit on the idea of making their own version.
We had a very small oven, a small batch oven. We used to have to sort of work it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was quite funny. We used to have mates of ours, we'd work the night shift, we'd all bring our vinyl along. It was still vinyl and real music, and I've still got records back at home which we used to play and put on the turntables, which have still got oat flakes stuck to them.
Cereal giant Weetabix was also aiming for the top. Heir to the family business, Sir Richard George was determined to seize a chunk of this emerging market.
The idea for Alpen actually came because one of our directors, marketing director, had a Swiss au pair girl. And the au pair girl would mix up the fruit and nuts and grain and so on for his children as a breakfast food. He saw this, saw the children liked it, and took that into the office, took it into the lab, and said to the chief chemist, you know, can you make this up into a product for us?
It was an immediate success with shoppers, and proof that big business was versatile enough to exploit the latest craze. Weetabix had taken a niche product and introduced it to the mainstream. As British tastes diversified, the food corporations launched new brands that appealed to small but profitable sectors of the market.
Alpen itself, I think, was launched absolutely at the right time in the right place. And timing is everything. What it did was to open up a completely new type of ready-to-eat cereal.
We know you know Alpen is deliciously healthy.
As culinary and health fads have come and gone, they've been able to re-engineer this product to stay hot. Cereal makers have always stayed one step ahead of the health fads, health authorities, and managed to constantly update their product.
In this environment, food companies had to be nimble to exploit our growing obsession with diet. Having sat out the muesli revolution, the next big fad gave industry Goliath Kellogg's the perfect opportunity to catch up. The roughage missing from much processed food was becoming a worry for many. 1982, and out of nowhere, fibre was about to become the next big thing.
Based on eating fibre, like bran, it became the biggest selling diet book in British publishing.
2 million copies have been sold so far. It's the fastest selling Penguin book ever.
Bran and fibre really took off in a huge way over the space of a very few years, with the publication of the F-Plan diet, a hugely successful diet book which advocated eating an extremely high fibre diet.
So everybody suddenly went fibre mad. And bran is boring. I mean, bran is the outer crust of the wheat. So when you've taken all the nice white bits out and made it into flour, you get left with bran. And bran usually is used for cattle feed and things like that.
The issue for Kellogg and for the advertising was that as soon as you mentioned bran, the consumer reaction was, well, that really doesn't taste very nice. In fact, it probably is pretty disgusting.
Far fewer calories than most breakfast cereals.
We were doing a lot of branding of All Bran and Bran Flakes in women's magazines, particularly back panel promotions, which is another way that we bring the message to the consumer.
Down to the front, back, no preservatives.
The genius of Kellogg's was to take a product associated with bowel movements and introduce it to polite satiety. It was responding to our growing desire for self-medication through food.
Eat yourself fitter, not fatter, with Kellogg's All Bran. Good.
What Kellogg recognised was that there was an opportunity to pick up on health trends which they'd observed, and they were very, very good at doing their research and understanding what was going on in the broader market. And the brief, very simply, was to take these products, as we put it, out of the medicine cabinet and onto the breakfast table.
To get the public to buy bran, even if it was packed with sugar and salt, required a tour de force from the ad men. they didn't disappoint. Kellogg's dumped a jingle-shaped bomb on the heads of an unsuspecting British public.
Well, what about the weather? Is it gonna rain? You can ask without any reply.
The advert that I tend to remember the most is the bran flake advert.
They'll all reply.
You know, the tasty, very, very tasty. They're very tasty. Just because it's sort of light and slightly humorous.
I just remember everyone saying, look, just remember, you've got to get across this taste message. You've got to make it very, very clear that these actually taste really good, surprisingly good.
How'd you like your eggs done? Can you see the milkman? You know you gotta...
You know, advertising isn't a science. It's a bit of art, a bit of magic, a bit of alchemy that all came together to work.
Tasty, tasty.
Sales of bran flakes leapt 41% in a year.
Very tasty.
The food corporations had survived the processing debate and shown adaptability by exploiting the new health market. But a new threat to the big brands was emerging. The UK's shopping habits had been going through a revolution. It was the age of the supermarket. By 1980, for the first time, we bought most of our foods in big chains and not local stores.
During the 1960s, our business tripled in size, and it more than doubled again during the 1970s.
The supermarkets were able to use the huge revenues their increased customer base gave them to launch their own products. Own label represented value for money for shoppers, but threatened the supremacy of the mainstream brands.
The years where own label really grew, Sainsbury's brand came to the fore, were during the 1960s and early 1970s. By the mid-1970s, around half of what we were selling was Sainsbury's brand.
The first product we introduced, I think, was cornflakes, followed by a sequence of other slightly less popular lines, but which amounted to quite a considerable volume in total.
The role of own label is a particular part of the competition in the UK marketplace. It's not unique. There is own label elsewhere in the world, but nowhere is own label such a big part of the mix. And I would argue, therefore, that nowhere does the consumer get a better deal, because the big branded companies are kept on their toes in the UK in a way that they're not anywhere else in the world.
I think the first thing that Kellogg recognised was that this was a huge threat. They absolutely spotted that supermarkets were building their own brands and building their own reputation.
We thought they were sort of parasites because they were copying our products and riding, if you like, on the back of our advertising.
For the manufacturers behind the well-established brands, there were two possible responses: accept it or fight.
I felt it was incredibly important that we actually got into manufacture of own label ourselves, because the only way that that business could go was up. And if it was going to go up, then we needed to have a part of it. And as long as we didn't have a part of it, it was just cutting into our market, our share, our profit. And I just felt it was vital that we got into own label as soon as we possibly could. Within the business, that was not a very popular move. My father particularly felt that we should not be in own label. It was felt sort of somewhat of a sacrilege to start producing for the own label, when own label was our biggest enemy at the time.
But arch rivals Kellogg's chose not to touch own label.
We felt it was extremely important that we differentiated our products as much as possible from the own label brands. So we were sort of passionate about keeping a gap between our quality and their quality.
This trusted sign of quality still stands today. So if you don't see Kellogg's on the box, well, it won't be Kellogg's in the box.
A kilo of Kellogg's cornflakes costs around £3 in the supermarket. A kilo of own brands costs around £2.
We were drawing our customers' attention to the fact that Sainsbury's own label was the same quality as the big brands, but much cheaper, at least 20% cheaper, because we don't have those extra costs of advertising and marketing, and we're able to pass that benefit on to customers.
But when consumer buys a Kellogg product, they know what they're getting. They know they're getting high-quality food. We have an amazing trust with consumers, so they know what they're getting. They don't always know what they're getting with private label.
On matters of taste, the difference between own label and branded was harder to quantify, even for one of the people who made them.
There was never really much difference in the taste between the two, so I don't think the consumer would necessarily notice. And it certainly didn't worry me that it wasn't something that was going to be detrimental to the sector as a whole. They were very well made, and basically very similar ingredients. So no, it was never really a problem.
Own label is a fundamental threat to the entire philosophy of branding. It's had a profound impact on all the big food manufacturers.
If you look at processed foods overall in Britain, the rise of own brands was a major threat. But the cereal sector was interestingly resistant to own brands. They didn't really encroach on the market very much.
Unlike other food sectors, where own label has taken nearly half of the market, branded cereals have held on to an 80% share. So why do people choose branded cereals?
Good question. I think they trust, first of all, advertising. They trust what you tell them, and what you tell them is true.
Nice save, Pat. Thanks, Tony. Like to try your luck? Why, sure, Pat. But first, let's break...
The supreme advantage branded cereals have over own brand is that we all grew up with them. They're among the first foods we engage with emotionally as children.
What a goal.
Breakfast cereals have been targeted so relentlessly from their very first days, particularly at children, and they're very much part of the food that people are weaned on.
S is for sun, and B is for bringing up a bouncing baby in the sunshine on a taste he likes.
I grew up eating Frosties and Cocoa Pops and Fruit Loops. I still eat Frosties and Cocoa Pops and Fruit Loops today. And if my life gets more hectic, it's nice to have some of these things that you can hold on to that tie you back to your childhood and tie you back to when you were younger.
Honey. Oh, honey, honey.
And the bonds we make in childhood are the hardest to break. This is the trump card that has allowed the cereal super brands to see off the own label challenge.
So tell them the reason why, Mummy. Tell them about the honey.
But this strategy, for all its advantages, would also prove the industry's Achilles heel in its struggle with increasingly determined regulators.
Good afternoon. Junk food adverts during any programmes aimed at children are set to be banned. The broadcasting watchdog Ofcom wants the new rules to cover products high in fat, salt and sugar.
The announcement on November the 17th, 2006, would have huge repercussions for the cereal industry and our perception of it. The majority of all cereals, including leading brands like Frosties and Cocoa Pops, were officially labelled too sugary to be advertised on children's television.
It genuinely, I think, came as a shock to the industry, which to some extent believed its own marketing that it was healthy.
I think the decision to introduce restrictions on the marketing of foods high in fat, sugar and salt to children was a really important landmark in our attempt to begin to change the broad environment which influences in all kinds of different ways the food choices that people make.
But for government advisor Susan Jebb, cereals do have many benefits.
For the most part, breakfast cereals, I think, have led to real health improvements. They can be a very significant source of fibre, and they certainly add quite a lot of micronutrients, vitamins and minerals to the diet.
But not all cereals are equal from a nutrition point of view.
I would be delighted if these very high sugar breakfast cereals, which are essentially very close to being sweets, were obliterated from the market. I have no desire to see them promoted or advertised.
Children's cereals are worth over £600 million, nearly half of the total market. the manufacturers had little choice but to step into line.
There were some new regulations that came in 2007 that said some products can be advertised to children, some products cannot. Well, we, of course, abided by those regulations.
Kellogg's went back to the laboratory to change the worst offending recipes.
After school.
Folks are going to make choices around what they choose to eat. And we as a company are going to try and make sure we're delivering to consumers what they're asking for. And so on Cocoa Pops, they've asked for something to give them a choice with more fiber and more whole grain in it, and less salt and less sugar. So we've done that. We feel good about it.
What we've seen is manufacturers increasingly trying to reformulate their products in order to meet the criteria and the standards that were being set. So I'd argue we've had a double win. We've partly protected children directly from the influence of advertising, but secondly, it's been a stimulus to the food industry to reformulate some of its products.
Summer 2010, and back in Manchester, Kellogg's is pushing on with its big launch. At head office, its top sales team is being briefed.
As you know, in 2010, one of our business priorities was to make new brands massive. And for the team here, we've shown...
In London, the national press has been summoned.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what is quite a rare press briefing for Kellogg's.
And all over the country, supermarkets are taking delivery of the company's new cereal.
It's called Chalk and Roll. It's high in fiber. It's a source of whole grain. It's got less sugar. It's low in salt, low in saturated fat. And this product meets all of the FSA nutrient profiles.
2 years spent in development, £3 million earmarked for advertising, and Kellogg's has done it again.
New Chalk and Roll with whole grain and fiber.
The other great thing about cereals is you can constantly move the dials on whatever is being bandied about as the great health solution or health problem. So if there's a concern about vitamins, you add some vitamins. If there's a concern about fiber, you add some fiber. If there's a concern about sugar, you can reduce the amount of sugar.
It's chalk fiber fun.
What you have to have is regulation. You have to have rules so that they all work on a level playing field, and they can't pretend to be healthy when they're not.
We've been here in the UK for 80-something years, and we want to be here for at least 80-something more years. And so making sure we're doing the right thing for consumers, making sure we're doing the right thing for the nation has stood us in good place for the last 80, and those priorities still stay there for the next 80.
The cereal story is one of constant reinvention and restless searching for new ways to add value to grain. The latest manifestation left the cereal bowl altogether, spawning a brand new multi-million-pound sector. It was the most radical step of all in the evolution of cereals. It was the cereal bar.
Missed breakfast? Choose carefully. All is not lost with Nutri-Grain bars, new from Kellogg's, the breakfast people.
In somewhere like the UK, we saw the shifts in, the emergence of breakfast skipping, and that's where the UK launched Kellogg's Nutri-Grain bars, which became a great alternative, kind of good food to go, a good alternative to a missed breakfast, and that's now a significant business in the UK.
We want foods that need as little work as possible. All you have to do is pour them in a bowl and pour milk over it. The interesting thing is, at a certain point, even that begins to seem like a lot of work. So then you move to the next step, which is cereal bars. Cereal bars are for people that don't even have time to pour milk over cereal in a bowl, but want to eat on the run. So you see there's this constant arms race of how can we make this food more processed and more convenient.
Spending money on saving time had never been so important. Manufacturers seem to be admitting that even their own time-saving convenience food was now too inconvenient for late 20th century man.
Snacks in the UK for us are about 1/5 of our total business, and they continue to be a very important part of our business, and they're a good growing part of our business. So we care deeply about our snacks business. I think the real opportunity for snacks is to grow to be roughly half the size of the business eventually.
The cereal bar has also become massively important for the Jordan brothers, who pioneered their version back in 1980.
A lot of people were saying to us, we like your cereal, but it kind of goes all over the car floor, and I wouldn't mind something similar when I get to work. So we started in our kitchens, you know, to try and put together the same cereals, the oats, the nuts, the seeds, the fruit, try and get them into sort of bar shapes that we could then wrap. Nowadays, it's gone from us being the first people in there with, you know, a few million bars a year to a market being worth 250 million, £250 million a year.
Huge empires from Jordan's to Kellogg's have been built on the simple idea of endlessly adapting a cheap commodity and adding value to it. It's an idea that has been replicated across the entire food industry. Water is bottled, and yogurt becomes a superfood. Each transition promises us convenience, health, dreams. And for the food business, money.
If you take a simple, relatively unprocessed food or commodity grain, the operating profits for manufacturers or people who package them up are relatively low. They're going to be about 3 to 6%. If you process it lightly, say to make a cheese or a plain yogurt, you can increase your operating margins to about 9 or 12%. But the big money, the real added value for shareholders, is in the highly processed, highly marketed stuff. And there the operating margins are 15% and more, and that applies to the breakfast cereal sector.
It really becomes a prototype for how to process foods, how to market foods, how to brand them, how to build health claims around them, and how to persuade people, too, that they don't have time to cook anymore.
And they've changed our attitude to food forever.
Partly because of the prevalence of highly packaged foods like breakfast cereals, many people now feel extremely threatened by the idea of raw ingredients. They're not used to preparing something from scratch.
It's part of a larger narrative, which is, you know, essentially, corporations figuring out ways to insinuate themselves further and further into the private space of the family. And processed food is one of the ways.
In Britain, we eat more cereals than anywhere outside America. The industry has come a long way from Battle Creek to its position as undisputed champion of the breakfast table. From the cornflake to the bar, cereal has become the blank slate for our aspirations and neuroses, and in the process has made billions. How are the choices you make influenced by the branding of food? To find out, go to bbc.co.uk/foodbillions and follow the links to the Open University. Next week, we tell the inside story of how business has transformed yogurt from a strange, exotic commodity into one of Britain's favourite foods in just 30 years.
And that tasty tale is here next week, same time, same place.
Hello from Highdown Prison in Surrey, home to 1,100 men sentenced by the courts. Tonight, the Justice Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, will explain to some of them how he plans to reform the prison system.
If there's one thing that unlocks the secrets of the British, it's our feelings about our homes.
I've traced this very British love affair back to the 18th century.
Amanda Vickery reveals the private lives locked up for more than 200 years.
I want to breathe the life back into these interiors, recreating the ideas and feelings that made them. Somebody's personality really is written on the wall of their houses. She was keeping up with the Joneses. She's done very well.
Discover sex, scandal, and soft furnishings. At Home with the Georgians, Thursday at 9 on BBC Two.
Hello, welcome to Live at the Apollo. A lot of comedians will talk about going to the supermarket.
What were they selling?
I do all my stuff online. A lot of comedians will talk about their sex lives.
That's a moment of sheer panic, isn't it?
Same problem.
Live at the Apollo continues with Lee Mack, Rich Hall and Danny Boyd, Thursday at 9:30 on BBC One. Catch up on BBC iPlayer.
DJ Tim Westwood is king of buzzcocks this week, definitely not one to be missed. Check out his hosting skills on Thursday, here on BBC Two at 10.
Well, hello you. Just the two of us, yeah? If you're watching with other family members, ignore them. It's me and you. Saucy. So, previously in my life, I met Tilly's fiancé, Rupert Farley Pointless or something.
And this is Rupert.
Oh, please, call me the bear.
He's on army leave, so their wedding